Welcome, welcome. So excited to have you at the session today. We'll talk about all things portfolio. Yep. And feel free to keep putting into the chat all your questions, comments, thoughts. I am pulling up the chat right now, making it big so we have access to it. Awesome. Balance robust, incorporating visuals, real projects, real businesses, UX. Okay, awesome. Cool. Feel free to use the raise hand feature. How many of you dread doing your portfolio? It's just like both my hands are up. Feel free to clap. Feel free to yes, like this is the worst thing you can do. Yes. So I'm with you. This is the most awful, dreaded thing because this is the moment when we just put ourselves out into the world. This is the moment when we present ourselves where we're at. And sometimes it is really hard, especially when we're starting design, because sometimes we're working with constraints as part of, projects that we've worked on, plus also projects we have yet to work on. We have all these things that we want to do, but we haven't done it yet. And we're like, but my portfolio can only be this. And so today we'll walk through kind of first the basic structure of portfolio, shine light on some red flags that you can be aware of too. And then lastly, go through some mental model of just ways of rethinking your portfolio, show some examples at the end. We'll jump out and then answer any additional Q&A. Cool? Awesome. Great. So with this, let's align ourselves first on what is it that we're doing with the portfolio, right? Your portfolio is really ultimately, at the end of the day, this is showcasing you, showcasing your work. You can also think about this as an always on resume. So the beautiful thing about a website that goes far beyond you is it adds more color, more texture into who you are beyond that LinkedIn profile, that resume that's floating around. But also what's beautiful about it is it's always on, it's always active, it's always hiring, it's always doing work for you. And something that we sometimes forget is that it sometimes will keep doing the work beyond us on the portfolio itself, on the website. And so that's one way to think about, just in terms of scaling ourselves, is putting whatever we're constantly, this is a good tip, is if you're constantly always telling people something all the time or referencing something all the time, put it on your portfolio and send them there. This is the purpose of a website, really, of what websites were in the beginning, in the forefront, were just documentations for businesses that they wanted to put online somewhere easily accessible for everyone. And so people would type in this URL, get information. And so for yourself, what is that? What does that look like? Is it a video? Is it a resume, like the actual PDF of a resume, right? Or is it actually some additional readout or color that you've been saying on and on in your interview? You might as well just codify it as a part of the portfolio, right? On top of that, 3, this could be your interview cheat sheet. So often I see a lot of designers just put the final deliverable, put it on the website. It's not great because you should add color to it. But additionally, when you go through your interview, I see a lot of designers struggle with the interview to talk about their case study, but they could have just simply written, you could write exactly what you want to go over in your interview and your case study. So it's quite literally your interview guidance. You can see it as that too. And then lastly, a way in which you can just celebrate yourself and celebrate your work. So as you can see, thinking beyond your portfolio as this is something that people are using for my resume, but thinking of it as a tool that you're trying to accomplish all these other things, I think will allow you to use it to the maximum potential. Yeah. Any questions there? Yeah. Already shifting some gears. And some things a portfolio is not, right? So portfolio, especially when we have a lot of creative projects we're working on, right? Portfolio is also not a conglomeration of every creative thing that we've touched. And why this is really important, because number 2, you also don't want it to highlight things you don't want to do. So, I mean, I would just talk for myself. For at one point, I was very much into photography, and I put a lot of photography up on my website. And I also had a separate section that was dedicated to photography. And especially when we have such creative drive to do so many things, the way in which we weight our creative work may hurt us in what we're trying to achieve. Another example is especially creative people want to get super into development work, and especially UX designers want to get into learning programming, learning code. And while it's very useful to understand it, you don't have to program your website all from scratch, but a lot of designers want to do that. But also in tandem, spend a lot of times on like whimsical animations, features. But the reality is you aren't being graded on that at all. Worst case scenario is if your programming seems a lot stronger than your UX skills, when think about yourself, right? If you are hiring a designer, you ended up on a website and their website's programming and all that stuff is, oh my God, it's great. But then the case studies were a little weak for you from the UX realm. What's your first impression, right, of what you want to hire them for? And so this is where my kind of tip for everyone is put in your portfolio things you want to be doing more of and focusing it on that. Yeah. Number 3, other people's work. So this is just, again, something to underscore in terms of your participation, your role. Also, you can put stuff that you've been a part of as well. But a big part of this is just being really clear with what it is that you contributed on it. I'm not saying you can't, you have to be like super uber selective, but just it allows you to be more articulate with what it is that you were doing when you frame it through maybe your participation of it. And then lastly, number 4, I just wrote artwork there. So it's just thinking about where the broader portfolio lands with your resume. This is more so a resume tool rather than a culmination of your creative work. So a lot of the times people who are doing the hiring, which is really good to think about, they're looking for, a UX designer that could do X, Y, Z, right? They're not really hiring an artist, for example. And so my recommendation to you all is not looking at maybe those portfolios that maybe for specific artists that are hired, because this is, people want this artist, right? For example, or this architect or this like celebrity figure. It's a very different use case for somebody, especially a recruiter who's going through your website and trying to figure out, okay, is this person somebody that can send to the hiring manager? So really, in a sense, and hopefully this helps to maybe ease a burden, is it's more tactical than it is more creative, if that makes sense. Your portfolio doesn't have to be itself this beautiful thing. It just has to encapsulate and tell the story of what you did on a project, much more. Yeah. And I think that's a really big kind of insight and twist for people, is they try to make the portfolio itself the creative piece itself, but in actuality, this is more tactical in nature, right? This is an extension of your LinkedIn, but not to show your creativity, but really to show your thinking process through projects. Also think about the other attributes, right? Another tip is working backwards with what the resume or the recruiter has. What you see in the job description and all those bullet points, those are essentially the cheat sheet of things that they want to see as a part of your portfolio website. Yeah. They want to see, and that's quite literally what they're looking for. And then you just put that into your portfolio. So now you're starting to see it's actually much easier to think about. They want to see teamwork, collaboration. So then you talk about how you collaborated with people in your portfolio. They want to see user journeys, flows. They want to see how you touched on, right, design systems. And you're like, okay, great. I know exactly what I need in a portfolio. So that's how a recruiter uses a portfolio. And basically what they do is they match. Okay, do I see these things in a portfolio? If so, then I'm going to send this to this design manager who then can see the candidate. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we had talked a little bit about who's coming in to see your portfolio. And I think this is really important thing to underscore, is that most of these people are doing it also, again, from a tactical level. Do I see you potentially being able to solve my problem, right? It's not, do I see you being a creative person? And I think that's a really important part, especially if you're trying to go into the UX realm. A good quote from our book club, please join our book club. It's fun. Is this concept where UX is really the distinction of something that is usable versus something that is beautiful. And our work that we're doing, especially within the UX realm, is creating something that's usable for people en masse, right? Making things accessible. That's the beauty of our work, rather than we're just making things pretty. Then we're going into, right, illustration, photography, a lot of other industries where we can just encapsulate beauty as a part of our design artifacts. Also, other people who are seeing it, other peers, other colleagues, other clients. And you can quickly see actually the people who are looking at your portfolio are actually not creatives themselves. They're coming in looking at you as a business partner, essentially, being able to finish and complete a job. So I understand you may have other non-UX friends, other non-creative friends, and think about how they think about creativity, right? It's either not creative at all, maybe that's like Craigslist, right? And then they have, oh, that's nice and creative. But the degree in which it is creative, you can, create all these like crazy micro interactions, but somebody who can't see it, maybe just not see it, but they didn't realize you spent like 60 hours creating all of that. And so I think this is where you can have a little bit more grace with yourself and just maybe reduce the complexity a little bit, because you're just trying to answer to them, hey, I can help solve your problem. Yeah. Cool. And so with this idea, we can create a portfolio that focuses on the end user that needs it. And I think this is a really good approach with our portfolio, because we make it much more usable for us. And especially with this, we want to just follow a couple simple principles, right? So a couple principles. We want to make it simple, easy to use, unintrusive. We want to really point out the deliverables that we had as a part of it. And the secondary part, the most important beyond deliverables, is to understand the process behind the deliverables. That's it. That's all I need to cover, And then we try to add so much more, like this whole narrative. At the end of the day, we just have to make it that simple. What are your deliverables and how did you get to there? And that was it. What I highly recommend for people who may be struggling, and you could just take off the table, is I would just remove any like complex interactions, complex animations. You don't need it. It's nice if it takes 5 minutes, sure, but you really don't need it. Portfolios from scratch, especially if you are a visual designer or UX designer or a UX writer, please do not make your portfolio from scratch. Again, thinking about how you're a problem solver, your focus should be really on the UX and the UX story or the visual designs that you created. And then lastly, number 8, this is a no-no, is only putting final output. What you also want, remember, again, this is your cheat sheet, especially if you're doing interviews, right? To then talk through your processes a little bit. And so why I also say no with final output is, for me, if I'm looking at a resume, or sorry, a portfolio, a red flag for me is just final output with no text, meaning I don't know if you even did this. Unfortunately, in the space, a lot of designers are very known to just grab and go. They just grab everything that they can, throw and dump everything in the portfolio. It's not a great practice. And so with that, myself looking at a bunch of resumes, a couple of rules that I've built. One is, especially if I have no writing to follow, my assumption is maybe you may not have the background to talk about some of the stuff. And so why that's really important is, if you can talk about it, my assumption is you just did it. Because if you can talk about it, you might as well have done it. So if you can talk about it, write about it, especially, I'll know that somehow you had been a part of the process. Yeah? Cool. I think we can answer some of the questions that came out so far. I think I'll answer the first question, which is around how do you make meaningful case studies that attract attention? And I would say, quite simply, it's an order of priority. The first one is meaningful to whom, right? I think that's a really important question to ask, is at the end of the day, it should be, if you want your portfolio to be driving more success for your applications, you want to make it more meaningful to the hiring manager, to the recruit. And oftentimes we're trying to impress other UX designers, but that's not really who we're trying to impress first and foremost. We're other creative people, or other visual designers, or other developers. So I think that's a really important thing to underscore, is the meaningfulness is very different to who's using it, right? A recruiter, actually, they would be fine if you had a Craigslist style format and then you just had deliverables and then you just wrote down kind of like your description behind it. Like to them, like that's super crystal clear. Again, what they're also working, and a lot of these recruiters who work at these companies often just have a list of requirements from another person whose team that they're working to do the hiring, and then they come to the sphere of just finding people. What they do is they just go on LinkedIn and they're just like, okay, UX design, this is really the process, and they scour through all the people who may have availability, who've been at some place for a while, and then they just cold message everyone and they see who responds back. Depending on who responds back, then they go through your stuff to just see, is this someone that's qualified? And all they do is they just measure the bullet points of what they're looking at on the resume, or sorry, the job description against either your resume, your LinkedIn, or your portfolio. Yeah. And so that's what they're looking at. And so you can be really scientific in this sense, where then you just look at all the job descriptions that you're applying to and use that as your crib sheet to make your portfolio. Yeah. Awesome. And then the following question, let's see. Accessibility, reiteration. Okay, cool. I'll answer some of these in the structure in a sec. Quick synopsis: how, what, why, or what, how, why is really kind of helping us to identify at the core, what is it that we're trying to achieve? I don't want to spend too much time here because I think the next portion of it is just breaking out 3 different sections as a part of our portfolio website. But I'm going to skip around a little bit and I'll talk through kind of what it is that is really the meat and potatoes of our portfolio. But the idea is we have different sections of our portfolio, different pages that basically help elucidate exactly what it is, right? Like either the project or ourselves. And what I'll point out here are 3 sections that are the most important of our website, right? The home page, the project section, and then the about us, right? About me. And so the home page is really showing us at a high level, who are we? What's our deal, right? Yes, LinkedIn is awful. The next section, the how, is how in which we are solving for what you've articulated, what you've given me in the job description. And the why, the about us, about me section, you can put more as a part of it. But oftentimes you want to make this flow pretty seamless because like where I usually see is, I was trying to find the link for this UX portfolio website that they made as like they made as a joke, kind of poking fun at some of the things that UX designers put in their portfolio. And the first part is on the homepage. There's one line that's in the center of the homepage. That's, my name is blah, 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 blah. I am a UX designer who likes human-centered interactions. And it's just like some blanket statement. And I think as we talk about like, where is it the most impactful? I think we can even remove some of that off the homepage, just go straight into the project. This is what's up. Here are the projects, look at it. And then we can reserve the why, and then the about us have a little bit more of our color. And so again, like we could be really tactical with where some of the content is. And so some advice, what I will say is the homepage, I would say for your website, you just break into a couple pieces. The first part is really this like quick mapping of this, like the structure that could help you. But the idea is maybe at the top of the homepage is an organizing idea just to help centralize. Who are you? What do you do? And then what is it that you roll in? Is it necessary? I don't think so. I've actually seen UX portfolios that actually are very successful just going straight into the project too. Again, if you can't think of it, remove it, just go straight into your projects, right? That single sentence, it's killing you. You've thought it through over the course of a week, but that recruiter doesn't care about that sentence, unfortunately. And then you just go into the list of projects, right? But what I will point out here is your upper left project. This needs to be the most meatiest project that you have, right? Chronological order, not necessarily. You don't have to put it in that way. A lot of designers do because they feel as though you're supposed to, but actually what I recommend is starting with your meatiest projects and then only having a curated list of projects on your website. Yeah, in the order of I would say, the medius to non-medius. And why I say that is people generally start your portfolio browsing on the very left uppermost, like whatever you have as a tile. And if that's not the medius, your first impression might not be the best impression. Yeah. Cool. And also, if you have a ton of projects, then you introduce the concept of filtering. But until then, I would say curation is going to be your strong suit. If, for example, if I had to choose between 5 or like 10 like so-so projects versus 3 solid projects, I would choose 3 solid projects over 10 like or 7 so-so projects plus 3, because the chances of them clicking on the other ones, I know I said the upper left is going to get the most clicks, and it will, but the chances of them going next, right, into another project to kind of just see 2 is a lot higher, just randomized, and you don't want them to index that to the level in which they're indexing the first one. I know oftentimes we as creatives want to amass and we collect, and we love to collect. We're hoarders, right? We're collective creative hoarders. And my advice is your portfolio should be more curated versus hoarding everything that you can and dumping everything there. Yeah. You can do it as a separate page. That's what I recommend to some designers, is maybe have a separate page where you've aggregated and you saved everything. And let's say you're in a like interview and they ask an obscure question and they're like, oh, I want to see if you've had that experience, and you just so happen to have it. Go to that obscure page that has all of your hidden projects and then click through it. But why I say this is really important, especially for people entering the space of UX, is you want to make sure every single thing that you're putting down just really delivers. Yeah. And also, a lot of beginning UX designers have this conundrum of, do I take on more projects or do I just really focus on one? And really, frankly, being really honest, 2 really, really strong projects, 1 really, really strong project will outdo any day 5 just mediocre projects. And why I say that's really important is because people are hiring for the ability for you to go deep, right? The depth of your work, your depth of your thinking. And if all they see are just surface level things, to them, they're like, this is as far as you can go. And so basically why you want to go really deep as possible on some of them is because you want to show them your ability to go deeper. Yeah. Nobody's questioning your ability to be able to do 5, 10, 500 projects. Nobody will question your ability to do that. But sometimes as creatives, we try to validate, look at all the things I've done. Nobody's questioning if you have the capacity to take on a ton of projects. Yeah. Once you start going up in seniority or you're applying for specialized fields, they'll start asking for specific industry related projects and stuff like that. And so that's one of the things that you have that other portfolio, collection where you have everything maybe listed out. In tandem, you can just talk through, for example, clients that you had and maybe do a voiceover, right? If you don't have it put together just yet. So this is basically a structure that's laying out a portfolio case study from start to finish. I like to make it really simple, saying it's a 3-pronged structure that's just beginning, middle, and end. It's super simple. Don't beat yourself over the head with overcomplicating it. And then quite simply, you just answer a few questions in the first part. The beginning is, what are you trying to achieve? And how did you go into it? Meaning the background, who's the team behind it? What was your role? Just set the context, right? And then talk a little bit about maybe who you might be doing this work for, what purpose. And the idea is, think about it as like a movie, right? We want to create this narrative, and the beginning of our portfolio is the same thing that it's doing in the movie. It's setting up the context as to everything that's happening, all the storylines, everything. So the people you bring in, the methodologies, the players, this is the beginning portion in which you set the stage. Yeah. Also in an interview, this helps so much with just, again, setting the context for the people you're interviewing with. And sometimes I see designers sometimes go really hard immediately into deliverables. Conversely, I see designers spending a little bit too much time in the beginning. So then let's go to the middle section. This is where you put your deliverables, right? This is what's actually happening as a part of the project. And so there's a few things to think about putting in the middle section, which is going to be stuff that helped inspire you. So for example, you could think about mood boards, you could think about research that you had done. But even more than that, what I didn't put here is, what is your takeaway? This is a strong one that I highly recommend everyone to attach with every deliverable, is what is your takeaway with this deliverable? A lot of people spend time trying to explain what a persona is in the portfolio, and the people looking at a portfolio know what a persona is. You don't have to explain it. Yeah, like sometimes we're like, okay, a persona is you can talk about what you did. You can say, I interviewed 3 people, talk about the processes. Great. But please don't explain what is it, don't explain what a mood board is. Don't explain the purpose of it. Don't explain. The people who are looking at it, who are hiring you, more know what that is, and you're wasting a lot of potential space in real estate. Yeah. And also sometimes what I notice is, if your articulation of a persona is not accurate, then that plays against you. Yeah. The next one is process. So process is really important because it helps to kind of show how you went through from point A to point Z. And especially for the wireframe portion, a lot of the times we don't think about the iterative cycle of wireframes, right? So the deliverables like personas, user journeys, all this stuff, these are just research artifacts. We can have it, sure, in a section. I don't think you have to show the iteration for that. But the wireframes, there's a lot of importance in showing how you did one set, what are your learnings and takeaways, and then showing the round 2 and what happened there. And why that's important is because myself, as somebody who's looking at portfolio, I need to see your ability to take what happened, and then like kind of doing the second round of revisions on top of it. Oftentimes the portfolios that I see are just final wireframes or just final designs. And I think it kind of does injustice as a part of the process. And of course, when you're in the thick of the design process, it's so many iterations. You're just like doing this, massaging it, all this stuff. And so save the versions out and talk through, what did you learn? What did you struggle on? And then number 3, as a part of this, again, paint the narrative and the process, how you went through the iteration to get to maybe your final wireframe. Really, really powerful, the narrative that you set forth and what happened versus just defining it like from a dictionary sense. Because the more you can talk about it like a movie, the more you can really sell it in your interview. Yeah. And sometimes, here's another tip, is if you're struggling in an interview to talk through your case study, you haven't taken a step back to think about the story behind it. Yeah. Some questions that we can answer. We'll do a quick pause point and go back to the top. So this is a question on how to structure case study pages on portfolio. And then lastly, just before I get to questions, let me get to the end, which is write down what your final deliverables were, maybe like bullet points if there's anything else that you missed. Or last one is if you have any measured impact or learning outcomes that came out of it. Yeah. So that was a quick look into how we structure case study portfolios, context, or team effort. Calling attention to things that you did specifically versus the team and credit effort. My advice there is, first, in the upfront, identifying who the team is. You don't have to list everyone out, but I think the most important is, what is your role on the project? Just to underscore, you were working with a visual designer and you're handing off visual design. I think it's really important to underscore what is your role, where it started and where it ended. I think is really important. And you can add some stuff from other deliverables to show the context is part of your work. Totally. In terms of what you go into, like what you've done, this is where it gets kind of blurry, where if you've contributed as a part of the strategic upfront, put that in as your own, right? My advice, so this is like my non-kosher advice for, especially for our communities, is the way in which we talk about our work is really different, specifically indexing people that come from a more privileged position, right? Privileged identities, privileged background, privileged skin colors, privileged economical background. And so it's, what I will say here is, sometimes I've seen an instance where people, when they use the word we, it the interviewer, when they don't come from a very equitable standpoint, see that as, did you do this? Or are you putting we because, you're trying to put yourself into the mix? My recommendation is just take those pronouns out completely and just be factual with what's happening. So that's a little bit a part of UX writing that I think is a really interesting way. I mean, if you want to just like interject the word I, like feel free to use those and then use, for me personally, I'm like, I don't have a preference, but sometimes people who come from like non-equitable places, when they see the words like we, they read it totally incorrectly. Sometimes when they see too much I's, they read it incorrectly. So that's why my advice for some people is just take some of those pronouns out, because it just muddies a little bit into people's like biases and confirmations that they're trying to seek, but you just articulate with, this is what's happened, right? Let's see. Reiteration. How do you explain reiteration changes whole concept and project of an app or service you're presenting on your case study? And so reiteration, my advice is just quite simply, you do version 1, takeaways from version 1 in bullet points, like boom, 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 and then version 2 or version final. And then you do takeaways, boom, 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 boom. It's that simple. Reiteration is really important. And here's a couple things that I will just throw at you as what I typically look for in portfolios is the problem statements that you're setting up in the upfront, right? The beginning. I see also a lot of designers kind of missing this, is they're like, I am trying to solve for XYZ. And then your wireframes is just completely different from what you had presented as your initial problem statement. It's just, I think, a little bit of going through with a fine-tooth comb and just like reading it out to yourself to see if this is really a narrative that you're painting. But with that, feel free to work backwards. Like sometimes people set up one set of like challenges in the upfront, and then of course like it changes. Feel free to go back and change your upfront. Like you don't have to be like so tied down to it. Go in, go modify it, especially specific wording. Don't feel as though you're tied down to it. And feel free to use it as a reference, make modifications so that ultimately you want your story to flow. Yeah. And along with that, feel free to take out parts, put in parts that help to create this narrative. Yeah. And think about it this way. You can sit down. The ideal is you can sit down with a friend and just talk with them, right? This is a really good pressure test of, can you just have a conversation with somebody about this and just be able to talk through with a friend? And when you can get that comfortable with a case study, it just flows out naturally as a part of the interview process. And then it becomes so ingrained. But sometimes what happens is we try to be so wordy or verbose or all these things. Maybe it's not aligned with how we speak in our portfolio. And then when we present it, we fumble because it's not us. And so again, like going back to the pronoun usage of like we, I, or whatever, that ultimately, like I say, do what resonates most with you, but just keep in mind some of those things that it's unfortunately in the world that we live in, people have biases and the way in which they read things. They try to extrapolate a little bit too much information that it's not really what's there. Yeah, let's see. How should I add a real project working on with the business, even though I'm only designer she's working on a UX design advisor, not to, but my project done with UX team. I don't know where you're getting this advice, but my advice is always just put everything that you think is, really representative of the work that you want to be doing more of into your portfolio. Yeah. And if it's also current project with the business that you're working on and it's also live and you have permission, you don't have to ask them to put in your portfolio. My thing is, if it's live, I mean, this is bad advice. Sometimes some companies are like, even if it's live, you can't put it. So it's like kind of a gray area. But if it's like a small business, for example, and it's already live, like you're more than easily able to put that as a part of your portfolio. Yeah. But for larger corporations, they actually have a legal staff just scouring Google for people who pull some of the documents and put it in portfolios. So if it's one, not public yet, my biggest recommendation is you must password protect it. And especially if you work with a large institution, they quite literally have departments just scraping Google, just finding any of these leaks that are happening. It's not, it's not cute to get your hand slapped like that. Yeah. But to that advice, my advice is put what you are extremely proud of that you can talk through as a case study and put that in your portfolio, right? Yeah. Yes. Awesome, Francis. How do you balance showcasing content versus making yourself stand out a bit? I go back to also the biases. Unfortunately, especially for people within our community, you've got to just make yourself stand out. Like the unfortunately, the realization is, and this is a little bit of the coaching I do on the side with some folks, which is the systems that we exist in, right, are inequitable by nature. And people who are brought up in the systems inherently bring preconceived biases into their repertoire in the way that they engage with different populations. And so with that, my example is a white man who is acting very humble is also going to be very taken differently than, let's say, somebody here and being very humble. The exact same words, the diction, and everything that is said in both scenarios will be taken very differently. Yeah. Whereas one is given more of the opportunity, more chances, more leeway, and the other one, through an inequitable lens in which a lot of the world is actually trying to see what is wrong, right? What is up with you? What is that thing that I have to identify of reason why I should not hire you? And so with that, especially for our communities, BIPOC communities, queer communities, my recommendation is just be really conscious, especially in the instances that you are being humble versus just being able to just put yourself out there, just brag about yourself. And I index in the I recommend actually to many folks, just put yourself out there, brag about yourself, but see it as a way that you're celebrating yourself. And sometimes also the system shames so many of us, especially when we come from marginalized identities and backgrounds, that we shouldn't, put ourselves out there unabashedly, celebrate ourselves, because again, it's a part of a very, I mean, I could go like on and on about this, but there's a lot of complexities with this. And so with this, like my advice, the quite simple advice is just unabashedly put yourself out there, speak highly about yourself, just put yourself out there and celebrate yourself in your work. And I would say some of the stuff, like we can always have a work in progress. To understand that sometimes the way in which we articulate our work in progress, depending on the systems that we are entering, it gets very taken out of context and it's very different. Yeah. And this is like navigating inequitable kind of systems, like mastery like 101 is just really having this foresight into seeing some of these things. I'm glad you're loving it. Yeah. And this took me honestly like so long to learn. And I wish somebody had taught me this a long time ago too. But yeah, see that as you're just working against the system rather than having to follow these set rules and guidelines. Yeah. Because ultimately these rules and guidelines weren't set up for us to succeed. Yeah. And then we work around it. We create cheat codes. We play the system so that we can succeed within it in the face of inequity. Yeah. Awesome. Let's keep going. Any more questions on this format? Maybe I'll take a quick pause here. We have a couple more slides. Yeah. I know that interview tip portion. Yeah. I mean, that's like the simplest way I can articulate it is sometimes like what we say exactly articulately, like word for word, is very different if it was from a different body, and that's a reality. And I don't say that as, we beat ourselves up about it, but we empower ourselves, we work around it, and we work with it. And so we use it to our advantage, where we say, you know what, because you're going to do this, I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to talk myself so up, like you have no idea. And use that as an opportunity to just really uplift yourself in your work. Yeah. And use your portfolio to do that as well. Yeah. Any more questions? And then also another opportunity is the about page of your portfolio, talking a little bit about your purpose, what is your superpower? And why I want to point this out too is sometimes, especially for us when we've pivoted, right, from a different industry, this I want to highlight, this is really important, is these are all a part of your superpower, right? And sometimes again, the system doesn't want us to come in with a different background, right? Destabilize existing systems when we bring forth a myriad of different experiences that don't equate to what is the typical designer. So why I want to stress this is we are all here not a typical designer. If we were the typical designer here, we would be the face of every single company and organization. And so with that, understand that what you bring into the craft, what you bring into the industry is inherently what is so special about you. It could be your background. It could be where you're from. It could be the past jobs that you've had. And I've heard a few instances, some people here mention you're making transition from a career. Like this needs to be a part of your story, like your design story. A couple examples that I'll share with you of people that I've mentored and I've worked with. One, for example, came from an architectural background and had made a shift into the realm of UX and was, took a general assembly class, followed the bullets, boom, 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 and had a great portfolio, had good work, worked together, such a smart guy. And I think in talking about some of this, like we talked about like experience, find your like silver lining. What is that? Find your superpower. And one of it was just thinking about, okay, design as it relates to architecture. And finally, something had clicked for him in which he, in architecture school, had learned different terminologies and ways of working that applied to how we were doing design thinking, for example. That's a very loaded word, but design processes and ways of thinking about creativity. And it just finally, it's just like somehow unlocked something in his mind where he was going in front of clients and the way he was articulating stuff, it just, one, made a lot of sense to him, but also two, it was so much more interesting for the person at the receiving end, and so he was talking about all these different ways of thinking structured around the way architects thought about stories, for example, for buildings, and the way they prepped basically different presentations. There's a specific format to it. He brought that into the way he talked about his design, and it gave that like oomph beyond anyone who would have been able to do it, right? Along with his cohort. I worked with another designer who came from a fashion background. And for her, there was a way in which they had worked through textiles and textile manufacturing. And it was really interesting to see how she had applied that into the way of thinking about creativity as well. Also, many folks across the myriad come from customer facing positions, right? Whether you're working retail, whether you're working customer service, whether you're working restaurants, you don't necessarily have to articulate it in a way where you give it too much prominence more than you're willing to, but you have a deep sense of human interaction that deserves some breadth or some place as a part of your work. And I think the challenge for all of us is ultimately figuring out what is that lining and that connection and that thread that we have. Don't be ashamed or don't throw away everything that you've done. This is actually your superpower. Yeah. And at least for myself, like it took me a long time to figure out that too. Like I come from a very unconventional design background. And why I champion this so much is because I think this is what makes design as an industry so interesting. You imagine if we all went to the same school, read the same book, came out with the same processes, the challenges, would we create different solutions than one another? Some theorists say that you would not, because you don't have the expertise and experience to give it a different type of color. That is based on your lived experiences, your studied experiences, all of that, your worked experiences. And so really see this as a whole tapestry, as a part of what brought you here, but also your own unique perspective on design. Yeah. And also, if you think it's like super fluffy, great, awesome, amazing, do that. And let people bring you down. Oh, like you're too up in the clouds, and okay, bring me down. But sometimes I find that our community, like we're so sometimes so we fit the mold too perfectly. Yeah, when we offer so much more than that. And sometimes I'm just like, no, like break free of that. And think about it this way too. Wouldn't you rather have a company, a team, all these people who celebrate that aspect of you rather than who want you and need you to fit a specific mold? So we talked about, right, addressing some of these tactical needs as a part of a portfolio. Yes, do that. But here's a creativity aspect. Like instead of focusing on like the gradient and making that perfect on your website, like that's not the creativity that I would recommend you all to go down. Like the creativity is working on what is your POV, that personal POV that you have as a part of design, right? Some red flags that I think I just want to point out. So the first one is if you don't have a portfolio, but everyone here is working on portfolio, so great. But if you have it in a PDF, that's a big no-no. Don't put it in a PDF, put it on a website. There's a lot of different templates that you can use that simplify it. Even use Behance, right? Behance is a really great leeway in. Working, not working is also another great example of a website that you can just post images and they create basically a portfolio for you. And it's a recruiting platform for creatives. Win-win. Next one is if there's no writing, narrative, or anything that supports the deliverable. Again, you want to show a narrative, and this is a point where you can talk about your personal reflection into your creative processes, right? Number 3, careless mistakes. So this one I love to look at because I'm just like, if you made like a bunch of spelling errors there, like what's up? Sometimes we have spelling errors in our wireframes. Perfect. Fix them. Yeah, you can go back, you can modify your wireframes as much as you want. Nobody's gonna know you modified it today. Sometimes people are like, I have to freeze it. I have to never touch it and keep it as is. If you see like a flagrant error, like just go in and modify it. It's okay. Like not a big deal. And then lastly, again, we talked about the positioning of our portfolio pieces, like not putting the best one first, which is the upper left. Yeah, so let me talk and share about a few tricks and then we'll look at a few case studies. The first one is really thinking about, and this is like shifting away from the more tactical like portfolio stuff, but really portfolio is a mind game. Yeah, it's a big mind game with you all and with myself too, with us all. But really, it's sometimes we are just in our heads way too much and we just have to just be gentler with ourselves. So the first tip is if you find yourself just really struggling because maybe you're beating yourself up about it, change the language in which you are talking to yourself about your portfolio. We can have goals. We can have these big milestones in life. We can have these visions. It's okay. But don't beat yourself up because you're in the process of getting there, right? This is also a big creative ethos. Don't kill yourself because you're still in a work in progress. We've got to start somewhere. And especially with the portfolio, even if it's a couple pieces that you just throw in, like, great, better than yesterday, right? Little bits and pieces, celebrate those accomplishments and milestones. Yeah. And give yourself that compassion, kindness that you would also show a friend. Yeah. The next one is start very scrappily. And if you find yourself on the computer, you're just like, so inundated, start with a paper, start with Post-its, start with something that's easy and that works for you. Yeah. And so this is a really big one to stress is especially in the realm of UX, like you're going to learn a bunch of ways of working on processes. And ultimately the people who are the really best in this industry have learned what works best with them. Yeah. And that includes how you get to the end goal, wireframes, for example, of different features. What you learn in school, what you learn from other people, this is just what's worked broadly. But if something just works for you, like pen and paper, stick to it. And I think it's a really important thing to just shed a light on of this is our work to do and our work only to understand what works best for us. Yeah. Also, if an outline format works for you and a bulleted list, great, amazing. I actually love doing that format for presentations. And so sometimes when I'm commuting to places, I'm out and about, I'm waiting in line for something, I'll pull out like Notion and I'll just start writing a bulleted list on my phone. I also have a process where I will do a lot of the outlining of stuff, whether I'm writing something, where I'm creating a presentation, or I'm even creating a portfolio. I actually will do it on my phone. And sometimes I will do it in like a text editor, like Notepad or something that I can't check my grammar with, for example, so that I'm not hindered with a lot of these roadblocks that show up to just keep us editing and tinkering. Yeah. We had talked about this in terms of motivation is figure out how you can celebrate every little step, right? Reward yourself with every progress. Like when you finish something, your reaction should not be, F my life, I didn't finish. Like, this isn't perfect. Like, it should be, this is better than yesterday. This is freaking awesome. Find ways that you can change some of the ways that you talk to yourself. We can't beat ourselves into submission to be successful. It just doesn't happen that way. And in terms of like humble brag, do it. Give yourself all the humble brag. Society as a whole already pull us down because we don't fit the context, as do the privileged people in society. So they can do the job, pulling us down a little bit. Just humble brag with yourself. And in working, especially with our communities, I think that tip is really important to underscore, is because sometimes we just over index on humbleness a little bit too much, to a point where it's a little detrimental, and then it creeps into the negative self-talk. Yeah, which is no good. No. Tip number 4, let go of all the extra stuff that you're not on the hook for. Again, keep it at the bare minimum of what you need first. And so this is also important with just prioritizing of workflow. Oftentimes we forget that we even need to prioritize our own personal workflow too. And so with this, focus on the heaviest hitting item first. So if I was just starting a portfolio from scratch, right? My order of processes, if you want to write this down, is the first one I would do is just at a high level, write an outline of what's my story. Just write like beginning, like what are my challenges? What am I up to? And I would just start, for me, what works best is I would just start writing with a pencil, right, on a paper. The middle part, I would just hold off on this for now, but the end is what happened at the end. I would just write it out. Then when I get into the computer, I just go through the artifacts of the final deliverables. If I'm just starting this project, I would just rip them, throw it down and put it there. I would just start from there. And this is just baseline, right? Now, quite literally in 30 minutes, we have created a structure with it, right? Not even like 15 minutes, right? We've only written the beginning and the end, which is great. And then we have the immediate deliverables, right? This isn't the best, but this is in a 15-minute portfolio, like what we've been able to accomplish. Step number 2 is now add the write-up for every single deliverable that you put, but focus a write-up on bridging the deliverables together. Yeah, this is really important. It's not just explaining the deliverable, but it's how did it go to the next part. So why I told you just start with the beginning, end, and deliverable is now we have all the things that we need to link to. Ta-da! And so now you just link the beginning into the first deliverable, you link that into the second, you link that into the third, and you link that to the end. The second step was basically you created the bridges. That alone, you already have created a portfolio that's going to solve so many things. And then the third step that I would do is like the lens of just looking out strategically what I'm trying to accomplish is go back to your first kind of challenge of what you were trying to accomplish, and then pressure test that against every part of your story. And if it didn't fit or it didn't work, then maybe your challenge that you put in the upfront is totally not accurate and that you didn't solve. And you can totally work backwards. Sometimes I see, people going, we wanted to create a brand new application that challenged X, Y, and Z. And then I look at the personas, I'm like, was this what you came in with? I'm looking at your wireframes. Why are you focusing on creating the beautiful CTA when you said your challenge was creating and re-envisioning, right? A new way to chat with each other, for example. And then you showed me how you just did an onboarding flow. And so that's the last step, is I call it the polish of you've just gone in, put kind of the train tracks, you put the rails in, and then now you just polished it, which is you're just pressure testing it to make sure it goes back to what is the larger vision that you're trying to solve. Yeah. Hopefully that like breaks it down into something that's like super simple. Does it help? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Great. Yeah. Yeah. It's it's been it's been a challenge for me too. And I just applied that type of thinking and then made it so easy. Again, as a reminder, first set the milestones, which is just right at the beginning, a couple sentences, set the stage, at the accomplished, set the stage, and then grab the deliverables, the final deliverables of each set, right? Personas, journeys, wireframe, visual design, whatever you have, right, from the project. Second step, link them together with additional write-up. And it could be bullets of insights that you took away, but they have to be reflected in the next one. Just bridge those gaps. And the third one, the polish, is just making sure you go back to that first challenge that you set forth. What are you trying to solve? And just make sure that it pressure tests and aligns. It's kind of like writing an essay. We have a thesis at the beginning. Well, in this essay, I'm gonna, challenge your notion of thinking about why coffee is the most important drink of the day. And then paragraph 2, you're like going on a rant about like matcha being like awful for the environment. There's a time and place. Is maybe the topic should change or the challenge or vice versa, right? Yeah. Okay, awesome. And then lastly, accountability. So if you are somebody that works well with accountability, my recommendation is just set them up for yourself. One that works really well for me back in the day is I was just like, send those job applications in. Once it's in, you're like, you have to do the portfolio. You have no choice. That worked really well for me. May not work well for some. Another one is mentorship meetings. So set them up with people who you want to have review it, schedule the date, and then you have to finish it by that date. There's a little bit of pressure, a little bit of fire to do them, right? And then lastly, if you want other external programs as a part of it, there are classes. There's also this website called Case Study Club, which I recommend people to sign up for. They send you weekly different case studies to take a look at, be inspired by. They also have a program you can sign up for, but you have to pay. There's so many different ways. The accountability with a friend, what I've learned is maybe it doesn't work the best because it's like too easy to slip up. You need a little bit more of, it's like having accountability from someone who it's almost like, it's like a bad way to say it, but it's like authority figure, but it's almost in a way where you're like, oh, like I'm kind of nervous. So it's like the authority figure could be the job application, right? Oh, I can't mess this up. Or it could be these like mentors or these meetings that you set, and you need a little bit of that like leveling difference or the expectation difference. So that I think with a friend, sometimes it might work for some people, but sometimes it might end up like a little loosey-goosey and you might just end up spinning the whole time on it. Yeah. Cool. So let's take a look. I set up some time for us to take a look at some portfolios. So let me pull it up. Any questions so far? We can do a quick Q&A while I pull some of this stuff. Any question is a-okay. No such thing as a bad question. Yes. What is your question? Where do I submit my portfolio? Great question. So it's usually some place you put in your resume, the PDF resume, the link to your website. Yeah. And you usually submit that as a part of job applications. If the question is on like what platforms can I build a portfolio on? Sometimes people buy like a .com domain and then create a website. My recommendation is actually, if you don't have a structure just set up yet, this recruiting website called Working Not Working is a really great place to start. All you have to do is create basically a slide, an image that you just upload, and it basically puts them side by side. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, of course. Okay, let me show this screen. These are other agency examples. I'm trying to see. I had a whole list, but I just closed out of it of other people. So here's one. It's a beautiful website, but I think what's really great about this is the structure of this is like quite simple. Yeah. You basically just have the beginning, which is, hey, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what is your role? What did you do? Where did you work at? And it's quite simply, even like the structure of this is actually really nice. You don't have to build this out. This is like pretty senior level, but quite simply, you just have these deliverables. And then right underneath, like we talked about, you just then talk about a little bit about the wording of what's happening up here. Yeah.
I think you might be sharing a different window, maybe. We're looking at the Spotify design. Is that, I don't know if
Oh,
everybody sees.
screen
Yeah.
sharing got paused for some reason. Okay, sorry. Thank you, thank you. Cool. So this is jashak.com. And basically, this is an example of a portfolio. And what it is quite simple. If you want to do like a big banner image up at the top, you can use this as your thumbnail, super easy. This first section is basically the upfront, right? The beginning. If you want to get like super tactical, this is a little more on the fluffy side, but basically I think this is the most important, right? Our goal with the Headspace Mini was to build blah, 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 blah. And then we built a mini version of Headspace a few months, which is available to anyone. So this states what exactly happened. I think this is really important to write what your role is and then where you worked at. And then basically what it is it's just, again, reiterating, it's showing deliverables and it's showing what's happening below. What I love actually about this is it's subdividing it based on features, meaning like what's happening with the designs that we've built, right? Like feature-based profile, feature-based portfolio, basically. And here they're talking about what exactly did they build and design. So sometimes in the wireframe section, we can blow it out to, let's say we've designed a whole app right from scratch. And an important kind of distinction is instead of just say, hey, I did wireframes as a part of this app, we need to blow that out maybe into different sections. So let's say I made a meditation application from scratch. That's my portfolio piece, which is impressive. Maybe what I'll be talking about in each section, the little chapters, is not the whole wireframing as a task, but as, hey, reimagining the way we have a countdown timer for meditation. And that's the feature. And I talk about that as a moment. And I think that helps to kind of elucidate again on processes, how you think about work, right? How you think about what you're building. So this is them talking a little bit about different features as a part of this set of work that they did. And at the end, again, this is just like a culmination of it. They have team members, numerical impact, what's happened. If you don't have this, totally okay. You can replace this with your takeaways. Again, remember to keep it positive, your takeaways. It's really easy to critique ourselves like, I should have done better. I know, blah, 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 blah. This is not the point to be super critical of yourself. You could just reframe it as, would love to go through another round of testing to see how consumers would have reacted based on XYZ. You could keep it definitely still positive, but still have a reflection as to what you're trying to do. Yeah, thanks for putting that. UX Folio. Yes, that's a great example. Pentagram is another agency. It's a really well-known agency that basically does a lot of branding work. This is like the case scenario where you have a billion, not a billion, quite literally, like hundreds of different like projects. But quite simply, what they do is they just only put like final deliverable, but in the moments they do these quotes and stuff like that. But what I love to look at is at Pentagram, the way in which they lay out the deliverable, I think is really beautiful. Yeah, so it's a really great example of if you're just like, how do I put this screen in this phone and just like, how do I lay it out? I always love just looking at Pentagram for just examples of how they make the screens, especially with like visual design of digital products, more sexy, Yeah. Cool. So that's Pentagram. I'll drop that link. 1 sec. And then the Spotify, this one was it was more like a blog post, but I was taking a look at it from just a structure perspective. I think it did a good job of just, I could replace this with any portfolio item. So it's basically, I mean, this is how we write portfolios, is think about it as an article too, right? And basically they have kind of the intro up front, defining the goal. I'll drop this kind of into the chat, but some of the structure of this I thought was really great just to take a look at for inspiration. They have here like insights pulled out, right? Insights are actionable, observed behaviors that we're solving for, solutioning against. Basically talking a little bit about this. They have deliverables and they talk, right, about these deliverables, what's happening. And it's more around just like the narratives. Yeah. Let's see. This was the case study club that I had mentioned. They host on this website a slew of different case studies to look at, but sometimes it's a little much. It's a lot, but take it with a grain of salt. You just basically click into one of them and you click again and you can see an example of a case study someone created. Yeah. So I think this is a great one. Good usability tip too is in the case that you have these like thumbnails and the text is like super small, you've got to make these like clickable so people can zoom in, because more often than not, product managers and people who are looking at your deliverable want to be actually seeing, like, add a little like a fidelity deeper, like what's actually happening. My tip is you actually don't need to show, I wouldn't show everything like this. I actually think if you pick 2 or 3 screens and made them like big moments and allow them to sing, actually do a much better job than this. Like this to me, again, like your point is not to show that you can do busy work. This is, I can do a lot of screens. Look at me, I could multiply this by 5 and be like, oh, isn't that impressive? It's, you want to go beyond that and show what an impact you're making on the design front. And with some of these screenshots, if it is something that you don't want to share kind of the write-up, you have to just kind of like elucidate exactly what's happening underneath a little bit deeper. Yeah. Let's see what else. I have more. This is a, let me see if I could find another example. No, it doesn't exist anymore. Any questions so far? Any other thoughts? Let me pull up more examples for us. I think I like this one. This is another good one. Agency called Made in House. Big moments for imagery. And then, I mean, this is a little too designed out, but basically they have a written portion really talking about every section of what's happening here. Yeah. And they go through and really methodically talk about moments, and they add a really, really great narrative as a part of the project. And then you could swipe horizontally between all the deliverables. Yeah. That's another example. Where is it? Here we go. Here's a good one that I always reference. Tehan and Lax is another agency that had a organization that they ran that made Medium back in the day. And so what I like about this, I don't think you have to write this crazy story like this. No, you don't have to do it like, like pictures of your teammates and everything. But what I like about them was, I'm just going to scroll. They actually list out all of the things that didn't work as a part of their system. So here is a set of things that they had created but didn't work as a part of it. Let me post this into the chat, which I think is interesting. So here, a lot of the narrative behind, which is, hey, this was what we were thinking about, early approach, this isn't the final, but basically they captured video motion of all these additional explorations that they had done along the processes. Let's see. So this is also an example where they had these 3 templates that they had created as a part of Medium. And obviously we know which direction they moved towards, but what I like is they also shared all these different ones that they ended up canning. So in the beauty of, if it's a small project, but you had a very iterative process, potentially you could bring up some ideas. But what's important is not just bring it for the sake of bringing it, but bringing it and maybe talking and elucidating a little bit about why you didn't choose it, intro, outro, and filling the middle with what ties me and actual project wasn't quite as clear cut while a team was designing. How much the story again changed to fit narrative? Short answer is, what's a good way to put it? There are a lot of stories that happen on Netflix, on HBO, that is not entirely the full story. It was created with a great narrative. And so the portfolio is the same thing. I wouldn't say you need to make stuff up, but you can extrapolate the pieces that then make it a good narrative, if that makes sense. So if that means adding a little bit more embellishment, more body into one section so that it clearly kind of transitions, or it's dropping off some stuff so that it's kind of more simple and clear with how it transitioned, that usually makes for a narrative that makes it a lot easier to understand. What I will say as a tip to avoid in presenting a portfolio case study is going into the nuances with client issues in a resume, or sorry, in a portfolio / in an interview. People understand projects don't go as planned, and you just keep it there. You don't have to go into the depths, talk about this drama happened, these people were, traumatized, and cycle of, perpetual trauma from design project to design project ensued and how it did. Because what ends up happening is you've wasted all that time in your interview, specifically on that stuff that didn't highlight your great potential. And so why I say it's usually really difficult to include is because it requires so much color. That situation itself also required a beginning, middle, and end. And so why I say just take a step back and look at the bigger narrative is maybe focus on that bigger success story, for example, and then working around it of just like, how did you get to that success story, right? What did you do to get there? And maybe it might end up actually being a simpler story, and like simple and sweet is also really good too, But I don't know if you have anything else to add, Francis. I'm more than happy to answer if you want to share like specifics. Okay, Orlando. I have similar problem with one of my case studies, designing mobile app service to help couples share expenses in an equal power dynamic by taking each other out on meaningful dates. What we're going to do is let's just close out the recording real quick. I'm going to go over some like last announcements, and then with the remaining like 15 minutes, happy to answer all everyone's questions.